So we now enter into panel 5, and the topic of discussion is ecosystems of trust driving prosperity. I'm giving the English speakers a heads up. One of our panelists will be speaking in Spanish. Therefore, if you require headsets for interpretation, I invite you to make your way to the back of the room, collect your headsets, find your channel so that whenever that particular speaker is contributing to the panel, you will get the interpretation. I'm going to allow you to do that. In the meantime, why did we think that this was a topic of interest is simply because as we speak about the different actors, investors, entrepreneurs, agencies, governments, the workforce, it requires a network and it requires a system based on trust. Well, how do we build these ecosystems of trust and how do they drive prosperity? That will be discussed by this elite panel. I would like to invite our moderator, Jacopo De Toni, editor, FDI Intelligence, Financial Times, United Kingdom, to do us the honors of introducing his panelists. Please make him welcome.
All right. Good morning, everyone, again. And welcome to this final panel discussion, I believe, on, as Terry has already mentioned, on building ecosystems of trust to drive prosperity. Let me also welcome all our panelists on stage. I will introduce them one by one in a second. But just to set the tone of the conversation, it's a conversation on trust. So trust me, we'll try our best to deliver a panel as good as the previous ones. But more seriously, I guess in all aspects of life, relational trust as a key characteristic is something that it takes very long to build, but is also something that can be lost in the blink of an eye. And the free zone, the ecosystem of free zones, in a way, is no exception with its main stakeholders, from the operators, the policymakers, the zones, the tenants, and obviously also the civil society as a whole. Free zones worldwide, as a phenomenon, have got a long way ahead to enhance trust in their ecosystems. There are a couple of initiatives that you probably are very familiar with by the OECD, the Code of Conduct, or the same World Free Zones Organization with the Safe Zone certification that actually work or support zones to go in that direction to enhance the level of trust in their ecosystems. And this is a conversation that has different layers, different angles, but it can also be a very practical conversation. At the end of the story, trust reduces frictions and eventually unlock trade within and without free zones. There are many challenges when it comes to this long process to build trust. I would have to add to what I said at the beginning. It's much more easier probably to lose trust than to gain it. And we will discuss these challenges. But I think that the time is also particularly ripe in a way to discuss this topic, because if you look at what's happening, there has been two major disruptions in the past few years that really create a fertile ground for this discussion to happen. First and foremost, final consumers of goods and services, they are much more demanding when it comes to having access, transparency to the origin of the goods and services that they consume. And this creates a big demand for transparency along the whole value chain, including, obviously, free zones ecosystems. And the second big disruption is that digital technologies really give an opportunity to all the parties involved to go in this direction in a way that probably has never been possible before. Paper bureaucracy has always been a burden for trade and anything else, and is very vulnerable to inefficiencies, and it's very vulnerable to be an element of mistrust in the ecosystem. Digital technology definitely has got a lot of potential to address some of these challenges. There are new challenges that come with digital technology, data breaches of privacy data, etc., and we will also discuss these ones. Is this couple of recent phenomena, are these enough to build or support zones to build an ecosystem of trust? And how can incentives between the different parties involved can align so that all the stakeholders are on the same page, and the policymakers, the customs authorities, the free zones, the companies, the workers, everyone is on the same page in this trust ecosystem. So we will discuss this all with all our panelists. We have a diverse panel with representatives from different of these stakeholders that I've just mentioned. So let me introduce them one by one, and then crack on with the discussion. Next to me here we have Ms. Janela Rivas, who is an executive for Latin America and the Caribbean with tobacco group Philip Morris. Ms. Rivas is also a lawyer by training, held several roles in law firms in Panama, focusing on maritime, shipping, and commercial law before joining Philip Morris. Welcome, Ms. Rivas. Next, on her left, we have James Grogan, who is a senior director with US consultancy firm FTI Consulting, where he focuses on global trade and foreign trade zones. Prior to joining FTI, James spent 14 years in Ernst & Young and also sat on the board of the National Association of Foreign Trade Zones. Welcome. Next to James, we have Ms. Ambar Ruiz, who is the General Director of the Free Zones Program at the Panama Ministry of Commerce and Industry. A lawyer by training, Ms. Ruiz has held several roles in both the public and private sector prior to being in her current role and heading the country's Free Zones Program. Welcome, Ms. Ruiz. Next, we have Mr. Bruno Delot, who is the President for Enterprise and Diplomacy with the L'Audit Group, a French firm focusing on strategic intelligence for companies active in foreign markets. Bruno has spent most of his career in the French diplomacy, holding positions as the country's ambassadors in many different several countries of the likes of Mexico, Brazil, Spain, and the list goes on and on. Welcome, Mr. Deleu. And last but certainly not least, we have Tom Sprott, who is the Senior Director with TradeLens, a company that provides blockchain solutions for supply chains. Tom knows the ship industry inside out. He was, I was speaking to him yesterday, he was himself a ship officer on vessels, on bulk freight vessels before moving on to a career in shipping lines of the likes of Maersk and P&O Nedlloyd. So welcome, Tom, too. So welcome, everyone. Let me start I would like you all to actually try to set the tone of the conversation. And in a concise way, if you can, give us your perspective of what trust means for yourself and the organizations that you represent. It's a word that can mean obviously many different things. Let's keep it real, let's keep it practical. Ms. Rivas, shall we start with you?
Good morning, everyone. Happy to be here representing Philip Morris. Trust. I think that in every type of relationship, at the end of the day, relates to transparency. Trust is sharing information, but it's a two-way system. It not only depends or applies to the government. It also applies to the private sector, because we need to build together. And by this, I mean no government or no country could do it alone in an ecosystem that others participate if we do not share information, work together on capacity building, and exploring the possibilities to enhance the participation on the sectors, altogether being part of an ecosystem.
Fantastic. Thanks, Janela. James.
Sure. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation and to be part of such a distinguished panel. This is my first WFZO experience. I'm really excited to be here. I have a 3-year-old daughter, and I think we can all agree the world is a very distrustful place right now, and often it's scary to think about the world she's going to grow up in. You know, the challenges with social media, artificial intelligence, the political dynamics in the US, the pandemic, surveillance, you know, mega data. These are all things that I worry about. But in an interesting way, I think, you know, the Zones program, you know, zone programs all over the world, they have a unique opportunity, and they're a natural way to bridge that gap between trust across various stakeholders in economies. And that exists because there are regular touch points between all of these stakeholders, not only companies and the governments, but everyone in the value chain. And it's a unique blend of tax, trade, and investment that I don't think you see in any other programs globally. The commissioner of the Jamaican Customs Agency mentioned, she had a good point yesterday about striking the right balance between trade facilitation on one end of the spectrum and enforcement on the other end. And I think regardless of what the issue is or what country you're in, you got to strike that right balance. In the U.S., sometimes the pendulum swings too far in one direction, like you see with forced labor and the comments that Shannon mentioned yesterday. There's guidance coming out next week. So I think when it comes to trust, it's all about empathy, right? It's not enough to have transparency and predictability. You have to understand the other stakeholders' point of view so that you can come together and collaborate regularly, empathize to make progress. So I would focus on that. Thank you.
Thank you, James. Empathy, mutual, two-way relationship. Amber, what is trust for you and for the institution that you represent?
Okay, well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about an important topic, to build ecosystems, to look forward to the prosperity. I'm going to continue in Spanish, so get the headphones, everybody. Okay, the word, la palabra confianza, tiene su origen en una de las lenguas más antiguas que existe en el mundo. Entonces, eso nos conlleva a entender que es propia de la condición humana. El ser humano necesita confiar para avanzar. En este sentido, la palabra confiar o confianza viene del verbo confiar, que es creer en el otro, estableciendo un punto de conexión. La confianza es el eje de cualquier sistema económico eficiente y sostenido durante el tiempo. Y para nosotros es muy importante porque si no hay confianza, los costos de las transacciones son mayores, porque las calificaciones de riesgo también aumentan, porque el índice de intereses con el cual se puede acceder a las condiciones de financiamiento es mayor cuando la confianza ha sufrido detrimento. También porque se impide que los recursos fluyan a lugares en donde podrían ser mucho más eficientes y tener mayor impacto, y reduce así la actividad económica. La confianza es una expectativa positiva que uno tiene sobre la conducta de otra persona, y por supuesto es un acto de fe. Pero la confianza, por supuesto, se construye y se construye de a poco. Entonces, para nosotros, la confianza es un pilar fundamental para la extracción de inversión extranjera directa, pero también para poder facilitar los accesos al financiamiento para los empresarios, no solo de la zona franca, sino en general, cualquier persona que se integre al mundo comercial.
Zona franca, Trust is important.
All right, so a pretty popular intervention, but definitely I like the trajectory from the origin of the word to the fact that the higher the level of trust, the less, the lower the cost of the transaction cost, the financing cost, etc. Bruno, do you want to give us your own perspective?
Trust. In the business world, trust is mutual confidence between partners based on mutual interest. First, it starts with shared interest. If there is no shared interest, it's difficult to build confidence. And confidence in business has nothing to do with sympathy or friendship or things like that. It has to be built on facts. So in the case of a special economic zone, we have three main players where a trustful relation has to be established, which is the governmental authority, the special economic zone authority, and the operators located in the special economic zones. It's not too difficult to build confidence between those three stakeholders. But more than that, you have other stakeholders who are outside the special economic zones. People who are freight forwarders, clients, importers, exporters outside the host country or outside the special economic zone. And here comes the trust towards those people or the trust those people can have in a special economic zone. And here we touch about the reputation. Reputation is very, very important in the modern world. It applies to any brand, any international brand in the world, reputation. It can be destroyed in a few minutes by an incident. It happened to many companies recently. Look, for example, at the example of Ferrero, which happened to Ferrero, which was a well-respected company. They had a health incident in a factory in France, and their reputation during 2 or 3 months has been totally destroyed in the Eastern season. This can apply to a car producer. It applies also to a special economic zone. But here, we have means to mitigate that, which is to abide by international standards regarding environment, carbon emissions, ethical practices, and compliance practices, transparency. All that is very important, especially because if you are located in a country where the rule of law still has some deficiencies for the operators. So a special economic zone, when it can bring trust and confidence regarding its operators, it will help a lot this operator, which needs this kind of protection and halo of umbrella of good reputation.
Okay, thanks Bruno also for bringing in these other new elements and widening the scope of the stakeholders involved in this conversation. Tom, you're far out there, very far from me, but what is your perspective on this?
Yeah, so I think all the panelists have made excellent points. I come at trust from a completely different angle. You know, there's an old saying, in God we trust, everybody else please bring data. So I come at this from a data perspective. To have trust in an economic zone, it needs to be scalable. It needs to be scalable for the customs authorities to be able to do their jobs better. You know, customs always has two roles. They're responsible for the safety and security of the country, so targeting what's coming in, and collecting the duties of what's coming in to the tariff levels. We need to let the good actors share their data earlier and upfront to have a different experience with the customs authorities, to be able to allow customs to not focus, to de-risk that cargo, and to focus their efforts on the people that are not providing the data up front. So the good actors would benefit from this scenario. It's scalable because everybody's providing data and documents in advance. And you know, for customs, they're always asked to do more with less, and this will enable them to do a much better job of targeting. And this is how, in my mind, trust has to be built in a scalable way through data. The shipping industry is very far behind, to say politely, from other industries. I think we can do a much better job of sharing data, and that's what's going to start to build trust quicker.
Okay, thank you, Tom. We will get back to some of the points that you touched upon. As another will say, there are lies, big lies, and statistics in the modern era. Maybe it would be data and data. But we'll talk about the perks and perils of applying digital technology to build trust. But Janella, let me now get back to you. I remember a few years ago meeting some of your colleagues in another Free Zones event. I was pretty new in this environment, and I was actually surprised that Philip Morris was participating in some capacity in a Free Zones event. And to be honest, over the years, it still remains a pretty unique experience. There are very few other companies out there that do the same, that they go to these kind of events. So, in a nutshell, do you want to tell us why Philip Morris and yourself are on this stage, and what is the kind of work that you do with Free Zones to build trust amongst different stakeholders? Thanks.
Thank you, Jacopo. Well, yes, as I told you before, we as a company are committed to fight illicit trade. We work on the illicit trade prevention, and for us, that knows that the free zones are full of privilege and advantages of the geographical position of them, the law, the taxation, all of those advantages that give rise to these special zones also goes hand in hand with risks, and risks that criminal organizations see to take advantage and explode the free zones. That's why for us it's important. We are committed to fight illicit trade and to support the governments, because no government could do it alone, not in a region in the world, because we are talking about criminal organizations taking advantages of those privileges. So by working in capacity building, in providing technological tools, in sharing information, in working together with the governments, we assist on this task, which is a global task that it's a joint responsibility and need to be addressed of the society altogether.
So as a quick follow-up question, so do you believe that the global corporate minimum tax is part of the conversation when it comes to building trust?
Sorry, I couldn't understand you. What?
Do you believe that the global corporate minimum tax that was discussed in the previous panel and you have just referred to is part of the conversation, part of the recipe towards more trusted free zones ecosystems?
Well, yes, of course.
Because you will pay less or more taxes in your as Philip Morris?
No. It has nothing to do with that. It's because at the end of the day, those are joint efforts to address the problem, to address the problem altogether as a society. It's a commitment for us. It's a responsibility to us. That's why we share it.
Okay, fantastic. Ambar, do you want to give us the perspective of the policymaker, the government of Panama? We heard kind of the private sector perspective. From the policymaker and government perspective, how are you going about building trust in Panama, which has got one of the most successful free zones programs in Latin America?
Bueno, en Panamá creo que lo más importante para construir la confianza es que garantizamos las inversiones mediante una ley de estabilidad jurídica de las inversiones. ¿Eso qué quiere decir?
Guarantee
Que por lo menos
investment
durante
stability.
10 años, ninguna de las condiciones que
During
nosotros
10 years,
ofrecemos al día de hoy
none of the
para los
conditions that we
inversionistas va a cambiar,
offered
indistintamente del
to
gobierno que esté,
investors
o del
are
gobierno
going
que
to
esté
change,
saliendo, independientemente de si conoces a alguien o no conoces a alguien.
regardless of which
Yo creo que
government
eso
is
es
in
muy
power.
importante.
It is very
Y otra cosa en la
important.
que también nosotros hemos apostado mucho es hacia la digitalización de nuestros procesos.
Another thing that is
Eso
important is
aumenta
that we
la
have digitized
transparencia.
our
Y cuando
processes,
hay mayor
and
transparencia,
that
también hay mayor
helps in
confianza,
building the
y
transparency.
también hay mayor
And when there's
estabilidad
transparency,
en
there's
general y hay
greater
agilidad.
trust.
Para nosotros, pues
For
todo
us,
esto es importante porque
All this
facilita
is
las
important because
transacciones,
it makes
porque
transactions
impulsa la
easier,
innovación
and it drives
y la
innovation
inversión,
and
porque
investment.
permite también la
It also
formulación de políticas
permits,
públicas eficaces, es decir, políticas públicas que vayan cónsonas con lo que está
it
pasando a
also
nuestro alrededor y también
permits
porque genera
the
mayor
development of
crecimiento.
public
¿Y cómo lo
policies
hacemos?
that
Pues
drive
primero,
investment.
como había mencionado antes,
As I've mentioned
garantizando,
before,
dándole certeza a las
giving
inversiones.
certainty
Pero también hay un aspecto cultural que
to
es muy
investments.
importante, la cultura del trabajo en equipo. El trabajo en equipo creo que es una de las cosas que más nos está caracterizando a
One of the things that is
nosotros
very
y lo que
important
más
is
apoyo le
the
está dando a los
cultural
empresarios es
aspect
esta
of
coordinación
work. What is the
interinstitucional que nosotros tenemos
the
con
idea
distintas
around
entidades
work
públicas
in the
como puede
area?
ser la autoridad de aduanas, migración,
And how
las
each of
entidades que
these things
tienen que
fit
ver
together
con la
in
salud, con el
terms of
manejo de los alimentos, con la
customs,
inocuidad.
food,
Toda esa cultura de trabajo en
health,
equipo hace que
the-
también los procesos sean mucho más eficientes y
idea of
también se pueda crear
working
cultura.
together has
También
to work.
el trabajo transversal, en donde todos tengan la oportunidad de progresar y de crecer dentro de nuestro sistema de zonas francas.
In this
La
system,
claridad
we
en cuanto a las
have created the
expectativas que
idea that
creamos
all are important
frente a
and
los
all benefit
inversionistas
equally.
también creo que es muy importante el ser capaz también de asumir compromisos y de reconocer los errores
And in
también.
this system also we have to
Porque
be
yo creo que solamente se
able
libra
to
de
make
equivocarse
promises,
el que no hace
to
nada. Y
be
entonces, ¿qué hacemos los
reliant.
que somos proactivos? Pues ni modo, si nos equivocamos es mejor pedir disculpas. A veces que bueno, simplemente evadir responsabilidades. También
And
ser
we cannot
accesible
evade the
y dar la información
responsibility. At
necesaria
times
para
we
que
will
los
make mistakes.
stakeholders puedan entonces crecer, puedan cumplir sus objetivos. Si no tienen la información suficiente, también es muy difícil porque entonces
When
van
stakeholders do not have the
ensayando
necessary
como
information,
bajo
then it makes
tropiezos
doing
y
business
bajo una
very
incertidumbre
difficult.
que también va mejorando la confianza.
When
Por otro
information is
lado,
readily available,
procurar
then it
también
improves
la
the
interacción
trust
ciudadana.
between
O sea, hay
the
que tomar
government
en
and
cuenta
private
qué es lo
sector
que está
entities and the
pasando
public-private
alrededor.
partnership.
Por ejemplo, cuando atraemos las inversiones,
When we bring in
vamos a
investments,
poner un ejemplo
we're gonna
sencillo como
give
puede
a
ser
simple
atraer
example.
empresas que se dediquen
We
al tema
attract
del cartón
businesses
corrugado. Eso
that-
tuvo un crecimiento exponencial importante durante la pandemia. También lo tuvo otras cosas como artículos de bioseguridad, etcétera.
We track
Pero ¿cuál
companies
de
that
todos
create
esos
articles
artículos
of
que crecieron tanto llegaron para
biosecurity,
quedarse?
and
Entonces,
that
por
was an area
ejemplo,
that saw a
ahí
lot of
tenemos
growth
que
during
el
the
cartón
pandemic.
corrugado puede tener un crecimiento sostenido gracias a que con la disrupción que
Trust
hubo en
allows
cuanto
for
al
the
e-commerce,
sustainable
pues cada vez
development
las
of
personas
companies
necesitan
and businesses
paquetes
and the
pequeños,
free zones.
necesitan que las compras se puedan segmentar o que se puedan dividir, entonces por lo tanto necesitamos mucho más cartón, etcétera. Entonces, en ese sentido, también es importante para poder construir confianza,
also to be able to build trust
tener esa interacción
and
y
have
saber no
interaction
estar
and
aislados de qué es lo que está
that we
pasando,
don't
cuáles
need
son
to
los
be
hábitos de
isolated from
consumo.
each other and
El
what is
abrir
happening with
acceso a los
the
mercados
consumption of
financieros,
products.
dar certeza también a las instituciones crediticias de
The-
que van a poder
the
cobrar
financial
los
institutions
préstamos que están
also need to be
facilitando
able
a
to
nuestros,
give
a nuestros
certainty
inversionistas.
to give
Y muy importante
that
también la
finances
certeza
will be
del
available.
castigo, porque también aquel que se porta mal, si nada sucede, entonces
And
también
there
va
has to be
creando un
appropriate
clima
sanctions in
de
place
desconfianza dentro de las
so that we don't
organizaciones.
develop
Mejorar la transparencia y tener una cultura
And
de
this will
cumplimiento, como
improve
bien
the
decía mi
transparency
compañero anteriormente.
and
Y ya para terminar, sin extenderme
all the
mucho más,
factors that relate
traer
to
a colación algo que
a good
citó alguien
business
en
climate.
paneles anteriores cuando hablábamos del
The
Global
panelists
Tax.
before
Y es que
now
las zonas
that
francas
spoke
son
about the global,
mucho más
the
que
global tax.
incentivos. Las zonas francas son ecosistemas, que
Free
hacen
zones
que las
are more than
empresas
just an
sean más
incentive.
eficientes. Por eso
It is
no es
a
ninguna
system that
locura
allows
decir que las
for
zonas francas
the
son
economic
incubadoras del
of a country to
crecimiento y
be
que son
more
coeficientes
effective.
multiplicadores del desarrollo en las
And
áreas en
is
donde
a
se
great tool
establecen.
to
Por
drive
cosas tan
economic
importantes
development.
como que las zonas francas fomentan los encadenamientos productivos de triple vía, tanto entre empresas de zonas francas como con empresas locales como a nivel del comercio exterior. Gracias.
And all the rules need
Okay, fantastic. So in a way, strong rule of law, understanding of expectations and good expectation management, something always useful across all the different aspects of life. But also digital technology. And here I want to bring in Tom. Tom, TradeLens has developed a platform, a blockchain-based platform that in a way aims to create that trust along a supply chain, including within and without free zones. So to what extent blockchain is a step forward in the direction of creating trust, and to what extent the technology remains vulnerable to data breaches or data mistrust?
No, excellent points. So, with blockchain, from its inception, people were unclear what it was good for in a business perspective. Is it a solution looking for a problem to solve? And really, we should think of it as this is the beginning of bringing blockchain into our business processes. So one example of that is on TradeLens, we have a digital bill of lading. So bills of lading today, you're all familiar with them. They're shipped overseas. It's around $250 in courier costs, and takes several days to do that. With a blockchain digital bill of lading, you can surrender that in under 60 seconds from the carrier to the shipper to the bank to overseas. So it's about changing the business processes. So it was good to hear how governments are involved in looking at this. Government policy usually lags technology a little bit, but certainly during the pandemic, we saw governments changing from needing paper-based bills of lading to accepting digital versions of documents. So I think on blockchain, it wouldn't be fair to judge it, is it going to be useful for a business today? 1% of all bill of ladings are done digitally today. In 5 years, will that be 50%? Probably. There's a lot of benefits there. To your second point, briefly on, how safe is it? Really, how safe is anything? So the blockchain is a business process. It keeps the data as a ledger and records who was involved in it, who touched it, and what changes they made. But it has to be secured or stored in a cloud-based storage, and that's where probably the susceptibility is more there.
As a quick follow-up question, how do you create that trust with your counterparts to get them on board when it comes to data sharing? So how do you approach free zones operators, companies, shipping lines, customs, and convince them that you have a genuine platform that can be beneficial for the whole ecosystem, and therefore convince them to share their data with you, which is obviously data management and data sharing is something that is becoming more and more and more sensitive by the hour.
So I'll make 3 points real quick. So as TradeLens, at its core, it has most of the largest carriers in the world on the platform. They would never agree to share their data if they thought any other carrier could see their data. So using Hyperledger Fabric, you're able to separate data from one party to the next. So a terminal can see everything about that shipment that's coming there, but they can't see anybody else's shipments. So the data separation is an important part of it. On the government side, they have an interest. Well, a quick figure: there's over 500 million entries made worldwide. That's a WCO statistics. 500 million. So that's, with each of those entries, there's maybe 8 or 10 documents associated with all of them. You guys know better than anyone. We have 2 streams of pilots. One, we have a public-private partnership with the UN-based AICE2022 software to engage with countries to give them earlier manifesting to build that trust in the data, number one. And number 2, we have active pilots with 3 countries now, where we're digitizing the entry document, starting with the commercial invoice, where it can populate the customs single window system, and they can target it digitally rather than looking at a document. So I think the main story is this is just the start of the journey where governments will start to trust digital data and treat it differently.
Can you please repeat that figure, 500 million data? 500
million entries that are made today globally. So I actually went to the WCA website and counted them all up by country. It's So there's a lot of paper that's going back and forth.
Yeah. So this gives you the magnitude of the opportunity, but also the challenge when it comes to aggregating and collecting all the data.
So for Philip Morris, they're shipping all over the world. They have a responsibility to store these documents, paper, in a warehouse that can be retrieved when customs asks for them.
Yeah.
That has to be converted to digitally.
Okay.
So we can talk about that later.
Thanks, Tom. Bruno and James. Bruno, let me ask you, before we pass it on to James, and then we also open the floor to some questions. You have, as a diplomat, you have had such a deep international experience, so you have seen the world, you have lived in many different cultures. Trust means different things depending on where you are. In this effort to build some standards, as you were mentioning also in your initial intervention, how much of a challenge is cultural differences, a challenge to overcome when it comes to building a consensus around what an ecosystem of trust is, around how can companies trust the policymakers, the operators, companies from different countries dealing with operators and policymakers from different countries. Do you see that there is a cultural challenge there too?
Of course, there is a cultural challenge.
Can you use your mic, please? Sorry.
Of course, there is a cultural challenge, but it has to be based on benchmarks and internationally recognized benchmarks. I will take two examples. In the near future, the European Union will establish a border tax on carbon. Okay, I want to export and to access to the European market. I will need carbon certificates. If I am in a special economic zone where it's easy either to buy or to produce those certificates, or if the special economic zone can provide me with an easy access to those carbon certificates, it will be of great help. Because here it's very simple. It's not a question just, oh, you are nice, I trust you. I need the proof of the reason why I should trust you. I need a certificate. Second, I want to buy products from a special economic zone somewhere in the world. I go to my banker and I ask him a buyer's credit. He says, okay, what kind of goods do you want to buy? Okay, what quantity, what volume, where does it come from? Who is your provider? Where is it located? If it's located in a monkey place where there is no transparency, I will have a lot of difficulties to get easily this buyer's credit. So that's the importance also, I come back to the reputation of a free trade zone, the transparency, and this can be easily done through international benchmarks. Either, and I think it's a good initiative of the World Free Zone Organization to establish a safe zone program for its members, and later in the near future, trying to comply with international code of conduct like the OECD Code of Conduct.
Okay.
Two examples,
Yeah.
carbon credits, certification of compliance.
Yeah, maybe we can go back to this later. But James, the U.S. has done some work also at the legislative level to strengthen trust in the ecosystem between stakeholders and export zones across the country. What is your perspective on the challenges that then eventually come into play when it comes to implement these laws, regulation, and build real trust between the stakeholders?
Yeah, I think it comes back to something Bruno has mentioned a few times, is reputation. In parts of the world, zone programs have a reputation for circumvention of tariff. Even in the U.S., you see that perception, you see that reputation from time to time, depending on, which port you're operating within. So that can be a challenge. And I think if the customs authorities can begin treating zones like partner programs, like they do with CTPAT, ISA, and AEO, it'll elevate that reputation and kind of facilitate more growth. To give one example of good trust, we activated a zone site, kind of rural U.S. It was several hours drive away from the customs authority, from the port of entry. The customs officers did not want to drive to inspect this physical security. They had better things to do. They were poorly staffed. But we were able to come to the table with them, show them some video footage, show them some photographs, and they activated that zone site without ever having seen it. So I think that's a good example where, customs has these guidelines for physical security, but the local port directors are given some discretion in how they work with the companies and work with the different stakeholders to, for mutual benefit.
Okay, how do you strike there? How do you find the right measure between applying the rule and navigating that flexibility or room for flexibility?
It comes back to empathy. I know it's not like a kumbaya approach. It's really just consistently talking with other stakeholders. Like at NAFTZ, our executive committee, we have monthly calls with customs headquarters and quarterly calls with the Department of Commerce so that we can elevate specific port issues to those agencies and help resolve those issues. And I think without that ongoing dialogue, you can't build trust and you can't measure trust. Like has been mentioned a lot, trust can be destroyed in a day, but it takes a long time to build it. So I think it comes back to empathy and understanding those points of view and compromising, honestly.
Okay, thank you, James. Let's open the floor to questions, if there is any. Oh, there you go. We have got two already. So let's try to get the two questions right away. If you can introduce yourself and tell us to whom you would like to direct your question, please.
Yes, thank you. My name is Claudia Avila, and I work for the government of Mexico. My question is, generally speaking, but maybe Janela can better answer, is this topic can be very ambiguous and very abstract, and I wonder if you are landing it into a methodology to measure the actions that you are doing in terms of transparency, compliance, because it is relatively easy and to talk about, and everybody wants to go for prosperity in terms of transparency, but how do you land these actions? You talked about building training capacity. What are you doing in terms of having KPIs or results based on actions that you are doing?
Thank you. Very good question. Janela, how do you measure trust?
Well, yeah, indeed, as a company, as I said before, we are fully committed on the capacity building side. So what we do is that obviously we are at the disposals of the government to train, to provide information, to provide technological tools. And we don't do it as a one-time thing. We constantly do it. We are working on that on a daily basis. And we are working on that hand in hand, not only as a specific country. We are working on that globally, internationally, to provide it and to constant work on it together and hand in hand with the governments.
Do you, as a company, do you publish a transparency report or a sustainability report?
Yes, as a company, we do. We are formally providing, all that information is formally addressed and provided and published.
Okay. If I can also bring in Amber on this, from the government perspective, how do you measure trust, transparency, efficiency in your free zones ecosystems?
Bueno, lo primero es que nosotros siempre decimos que estamos abiertos a las buenas
The first thing we say
inversiones.
is that we are always
Las buenas
available
inversiones son
for
aquellas
good
que pasan por el
investments.
tamiz de la
What
debida
happens is
diligencia
that we have to be
compliance, que
diligent,
tiene que
we
ser
have to be
antes,
compliant,
durante
and
la ejecución de
compliance
los
has to come
negocios,
before the
incluso
execution of
cuando ya
business,
está saliendo
including
del
while
régimen
it is going
económico
on,
especial.
even in
Nosotros
the
en
special
este
economic
sentido,
zone.
pues
In this
hacemos
sense,
también
we
debidas diligencias reforzadas para saber
we have to
tanto quién es el
reinforce
beneficiario final, como también cuál es la
end
reputación que
benefits
tiene tanto
and
la
the
organización
reputation
como los sujetos de control
and all
dentro
the
de
control
la
aspects.
empresa. Otra
within the
cosa
company. Another thing we
que
do is
también establecemos,
we
pues son por
establish
supuesto sistemas de fiscalización y de control.
physical
Y
systems of
por
control,
supuesto
and
estamos alineándonos hacia
we're
iniciativas que
aligning
nos
our
permitan
initiatives
anticiparnos a las
that allow us to
dificultades, tales como
anticipate
la de la
difficulties and
Organización
challenges.
Mundial de Aduanas, que es la de operador
In
económico
in
autorizado.
the same
Eso
way,
nos
the
permite anticiparnos y
World's
que
Customs
también pueda haber
Agency
esa confianza de que
has
se
asked us
sabe
to.
qué, quién, de dónde, para dónde,
So we
cuál es
know
la
that where,
trazabilidad que se le dio a
who,
determinado
and what,
bien.
and
Y
that we
por
have
otra
made the right
parte, pues
determinations.
también estamos abocándonos hacia los lineamientos de los organismos internacionales en materia de control, tratando pues de que precisamente pues haya transparencia y fortaleciendo también nuestras
And we're working with
instituciones.
the World
En
Organization to
pandemia
ensure that
nosotros creamos
everything is
una
aligned to the
fiscalía
standards that they have established.
especializada en delitos que tienen que ver con con defraudación aduanera, con evasión fiscal, y creo que eso es un paso muy importante que ha dado Panamá en favor de esas medidas de control.
These methods of control
Okay.
we can evade,
Thank you, Tom.
we can
Final note on this?
Hi. So just to add to that, you're talking about measures and how governments view it, but I think an important part of this also is changing the way we work as a government entity like Customs. So it's not enough to use data to have more information. You have to use it to transform the way you work. You have to move from paper-based documents and stamping and releases to digitizing that process and letting people interact with it that way. So part of it is measuring, but part of it is enabling.
Okay, thanks. I think there was another question over here in the third row. Here, can you please? I don't see. Oh, okay.
Okay.
So, yeah, a quick one. Then we can also take the other question from the lady here in the third row. Yeah.
Thank you. Good afternoon. I just wanted to support something that Bruno mentioned with respect to standards. My name is Sharon May Shirley, and I'm representing the Jamaica National Agency for Accreditation, which is an agency of the Ministry of Industry, Investment, and Commerce. And just to indicate that here in Jamaica, we have the national quality infrastructure to support or free zones. We have an accreditation body that recognizes and is internationally recognized to support our inspections and certifications. And as we know, as international trade has grown, so too has the number of national and international voluntary and mandatory technical regulations that are established to support the confidence that's in your samples, your products, your services. And here in Jamaica, we have an internationally recognized accreditation body. We recognize not just the test and calibration certificates, but certificates from certification bodies. And just recently, Jamaica has been recognized by the FDA as an accredited third-party accreditor for certification bodies. So just to make that point, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much also for telling us more about the way you're doing things here in Jamaica. Third row over here. Can you please raise your hand so that they know it's over there? Yeah.
Hi, good morning. I'm Julia Dewey. I'm from the government also, the Bureau of Standards though. My question is about blockchain technology and how that improves trust, but also improves business processes. And given the new input, the new requirement, or the new use of data, not new, but the ongoing trend in use of data, which is extremely important, what I want to know, whose responsibility? How do we use data better? Is it the company or should the government be doing it? Because Trade Lanes, I think, is a private firm. So in small states like Jamaica, how do we move to that place?
Okay, very good question.
Excellent question. So how does blockchain or any new technology, who's responsible? How does it fit into the government process? So you can think of blockchain as any other technology, Excel or anything else, you decide to use it. Blockchain is not for everything. It's only when you require, immutable, trustable records of events, which usually is related to tradable legal documents. As it relates to the government accepting those, in several countries, it's still paper-based, it requires stamps and the like. So I think the first step is to make sure they can accept digital versions of documents. That's step number one. Once they can do that, whether it's in blockchain or another vehicle, there's plenty of ways to do that.
Okay, thanks, Tom. Bruno, you wanted to add something?
Just a comment about the blockchain. Of course, in the future, the blockchain maybe bring a solution, but meanwhile, you have other instruments that the blockchain to bring authentication and traceability in the supply chain. For example, and what is more and more needed, when it comes to environmental rules, when it comes to carbon rules, when it comes to compliance, ethical compliance, when it comes to compliance with labor laws or labor regulations, to access the main markets, you need those certificates. And it's easily, you can now, with other technologies, to provide it. If we take the example of Philip Morris and the tobacco industry, they now tag all their cigarettes pack with a digital code which will tell you the route from the factory to the destination market. And you can identify and secure the supply chain of the cigarettes. The same applies to certain minerals. The same applies to natural products like timber, cotton, and other raw materials. More and more traceability and authentication of the origin is necessary. And the same also applies for garment industry, leather industry, a lot of industries. And it is very important, if we come back to the interest of a special economic zone, to be able, for the authority of the special economic zone, to provide all those services to its clients and to its tenants.
Okay.
And the same also, for example, for reputation and anti-money laundering, IP protection through compliance certificates like the Safe Zone program or the OECD Code of Conduct.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. We still have 3 minutes, but we have to wrap up because there was another person that was supposed to be on this panel. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it. I'm talking about Lars Carlson, the Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting with Danish shipping line Maersk. He couldn't make it, but he left a video message for us. So we will play it in a second. But before going to the video message, let me thank again Janela Rivas, James Grogan, Amber Ruiz, Bruno Delot, and Thomas Sprott for your comments. Please, a big round of applause for our panelists. And now, if we have it, we are ready to play Lars's message. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. It's a great pleasure and an honor for me to address you here today. I should have been with you on this very important event from World Free Zone Organization on Jamaica right now. But I just tested positive for the third time for COVID-19, despite my 4 vaccine shots. So I'm unable to travel right now. But, however, this is the new world we live in. We see trade wars, we see rising protectionism, we see swift policy decisions like Brexit, we see incidents like the Suez Canal Black Swan incident, and of course massive cyber attacks and a war in the middle of one of the biggest trading unions of the world. All of these things are here to stay, unfortunately. There is no post-pandemic, there is no new normal. This is the new normal. This is what the world will look like for the years to come. We will see more changes the next 5 years than the last 50. I'm Lars Carlson. I'm the Global Head of Trade and Customs Consulting in AP Møller Maersk. And we in Maersk, we see the challenges of our customers. We feel their pain in the supply chain and value chains today. And we know that there is a need for a change. a new paradigm, and we see it coming. I'm also involved as chairperson in a number of academic networks and research networks and think tanks around the world. And what we see today are trends clearly indicating we are moving to global trade 2.0, a new paradigm for international trade. What does it mean? Well, it really means two very important things, two elements that are more important for all of us than anything else. One is digitalization of trade. This is finally happening. While the pandemic has made us move from just-in-time to just-in-time and just-in-case, digitalization is the big game changer. That is what will change world trade going forward. And it's finally accelerating. During the pandemic, we've seen from a number of research studies that there is an acceleration of digitalization, both of customs and trade in the international supply and value chains. This is good. Bad news is it needs to go even faster in the future. The second big element is trust. We need trust in the international trading system. Trade is good. Trade is fostering growth, job creation, poverty reduction. We know that. We know that we need international trade to work post the pandemic, post new crisis coming along. And we need a new model, a new system. The borders we are operating today are operated in a black box environment that's been there for 40, 50 years. We need something new. Again, the good news is we already have what is new, the new paradigm of borders. So trust is a key, and trust is not something you're given. Trust is earned. It's earned by compliance. And of course, we have now worked 20 years with compliance management systems, like the Authorized Economic Operator Program from World Customs Organization. I was part of developing and implementing that as director of World Customs Organization. I've seen the AEO programs develop and been a part of that in more than 70 countries around the world. And we've helped thousands of companies to become AEO, and also to optimize and maintain their AEO certificates, connecting them through mutual recognition agreements. There are other systems in place, like the Safe Zone program from World Free Zone Organization, an excellent example of the same thing. How compliance zones voluntarily can show their compliance, their transparency, and that they have self-assessment controls in place to be a part of the new international value chains. Because in the future, value chains will only be based on trust. And we see this very clearly. We are working internationally on a number of projects around the world to create trusted trade lanes. Trusted trade lanes are supply chains and value chains where all stakeholders are trusted, that have gone through a record, gone through a certification process to become AEO or trusted traders or safe zones. This means that those stakeholders can connect. In the future, we will connect them digitally. And that will not happen 10 years from now, 5 years from now. It will happen now in the next 2 to 3 years. That will create trusted trade lanes. As we are now in practice operating in a number of ports, airports, and land borders around the world. An ecosystem of trust, where free ports and free zones, special economic zones, becomes the drivers, the engines of these trusted trade lanes, which will create trade superhighways. There will be alternatives on those trade superhighways for next crisis, pandemics, or whatever it might be that comes. But many of the players today, our customers, tell us we want to work with people we trust. We want to work with long-term partnerships with those governments, government agencies, specifically freight forwarders, logistic companies, free ports and free zones, special economic zones, that we can trust, that share the same vision as we have. This is the fundament. This is the groundbreaking new changes that will actually create the ecosystem of trust that we need for the future. We need to trust the data that is there on blockchains like TradeLens, the one we are using in Maersk and many with us. Today, 65 to 70% of the logistic data is already on. We are now putting customs data on. My colleague from TradeLens, Tom, is there on the panel today and will address this later on. But this is just one example how industry systems can be used for global trade 2.0. Like we do with different type of track and trace system, both for information, documentation, and for the physical goods. All of these things together will create that ecosystem of trust that is needed. How do you get trust? It works both ways. So governments need to start trusting the data from private sector, trusted private sector channels. We in industry need to take our responsibility to digitalize and to share data voluntarily with governments. And we need to trust government for doing exactly what we want governments and government agencies to do, as companies, but also as citizens. Protect our supply chains, protect our people. And of course, this is the way to the future. We know that free zones and free ports, and then, of course, special economic zones becoming safe zones is a very important part of that. We in Maersk will take our responsibility. We have our integrated strategy, where we have decided to transform and change. We want to offer our services and products end-to-end for all our customers, all the way through the supply chain. We will do so with trust. We will work with partners in trust. And of course, we hope many others will do the same. We will be AEO companies, an AEO company in all countries we work in. That's already decided. We will be safe zones in those places where we are involved in free ports and free zones and terminals. And of course, we will also be a part of connecting together with partners, together with competitors, together with industry, together with governments, the ecosystem of trust that we need. This conference here is a vital platform, one of the most important events, very timely for exactly doing this, for creating the first elements of trust that we need based on the trust system we have. Exchanging data, digitalized trade, promoting competence, getting the compliance we need in our systems to open up the black box of the border. And by doing that, we will enhance international trade, and global trade 2.0 will be better than the one we've already seen. It will be more resilient, more predictable, and safer. This is the task we have ahead of us. And as I said, there will be more changes the next 5 years than the last 50. We are willing to take our responsibility on that, and we will work with any one of you that will do the same. That is why we have now new products, new services, new elements of customs and trade consulting and senior advisory services, working with stakeholders all through the supply chain. So I wish you the best of luck with the panel, best of luck with the conference. Hope to see you next year, not having COVID for the 5th time then, but actually being there. And please reach out to us through Maersk.com or directly to me or any of my colleagues, because we are willing to take our responsibility. This is important for the future of the world. This is why we are here. Thank you very much for your attention.